of Israel with you, and if he holds up in a city, what will we do? We'll tear down the city and push it in the river. Well, this looks like this is playing out just, right there by the Jordan. It looks like this is playing out just like Hushai said. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Any thoughts, comments, questions before we go any further? All right, when he's at Mahanaim, David gets some help and support. And it may be from an unlikely source. Verse 27 tells us Shobi comes. And who is Shobi? Son of Nahash. Who's Nahash? Yes. All right, so Nahash was the king of Rabbath Ammon. And Steve was talking about when Nahash died, David sent condolences, but his son, who had become king, embarrassed his ambassadors, and that sparked the war that led to Joab's army being gone when David sinned with Bathsheba. Now, so David took Rabbath Ammon and took the crown off the king's head, and we suppose that he probably set someone else up as the king there, and it may have been Shobi. Would you ever expect the king or the prince of Ammon to come and give support to David? No. And so a number of unusual things happening here with this. Another individual that's mentioned here is Machir, and it says he was the son of Amiel. Do you remember who that is? He's been mentioned before. You may have to look at a footnote there. Does anybody have it? This is the one that Mephibosheth was staying with. He was taking care of Mephibosheth before he came to David. And so of the house of Saul. So David is getting support from the Ammonites, and he's getting support from the house of Saul. Wouldn't expect that. And then a third character that's of note here is Barzillai, the Gileadite. He lives over in this area, and he's going to be supportive of David. And so they bring beds and basins and earthen vessels of wheat, barley, flour, parched grains, beans, lentils, and parched seeds, honey, curd, sheep, cheese of the herd for David and his people who were with him, for they said, the people are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness. So here are some of David's loyal and faithful supporters at this point. His own sons, but his former enemies are helping him and providing provisions for him on this occasion.
Barzillai, I just kind of get the feeling that he's just a wealthy, influential individual from that area.
I think that's right. Yep. Anything else on that? All right. You want to take us into 18?
Sure. It says, Then David mustered the men who were with him and set over them commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds. And David sent out the army, 1/3 under the command of Joab, 1/3 under the command of Abishai and the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and 1/3 under the command of Ittai, the Gittite. And the king said to the men, I myself will also go out with you. But the men said, You shall not go out, for if we flee, they will not care about us. If half of us die, they will not care about us. But you are worth 10,000 of us. Therefore, it's better that you send us help from the city. So what's your thoughts on this? I mean, typically, king would go out to battle with his army. But on this occasion, these three individuals are saying not to. Why?
Because if they kill David, I mean, they've done won the battle.
Yeah.
If it was to kill all of them and David's still free, I mean, it's just like you said, he's worth 10,000.
Yeah, he's the central figurehead here. David is, and if David goes down, the whole thing's done. The whole thing's over. And so, I think this is good advice coming from these three individuals. Verse 4 says, The king said to them, Whatever seems best to you, I will do. So the king stood at the side of the gate, while all the army marched out by hundreds and by thousands. And the king ordered Joab and Abishai and Ittai. Now, keep this in mind. This is important. deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. When you hear this being said, of course, this was, keep in mind, it says as it goes on, it says all the people heard. So this wasn't a private meeting with his commanders. This was before the whole army. All the people heard when the king gave orders to the commanders about Absalom. So how do you interpret what David says here? Deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. What would be your interpretation of deal gently? Yeah, that's not hard to understand. There's really no mystery in words, nothing hidden here or anything like that. It's pretty clear message sent here. So it seems to imply that David wants to bring the young man back alive. Deal gently with the young man Absalom.
At the same time, all the people have fled with him because of Absalom actually going to kill him. And then when he turns around and says, now y'all go out, but you take real careful and not harm my son. I mean, you got somebody that's trying to kill your own flesh and blood, and you want to just go out there, even if you didn't really want to kill him, but in the battle you killed him. I mean, it's kind of two-edged sword.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I think that's a good point. Really, what David is doing is tying their hands in some ways, and this is another one of those times where Joab probably saw things a little more clearly than David did in this. David is allowing his emotions to override probably what would truly be best. And why would he feel so sympathetic towards Absalom? I know it's your son, but he didn't seem to he didn't grieve quite as much when Ammon was killed. Why would he feel this way towards Absalom? I think that's right. The reason that Absalom's doing what he's doing is, I think David could probably see, is because of the way that I handle all of this. And so he probably, I kind of pushed Absalom to this. I hate to take him out because of it when I'm partially responsible. I think that may be what's going on with him here.
And as Steve said, in the heat of battle, it's hard to, set boundaries and to be able to follow those boundaries like David has set here. But on this occasion, as this story unfolds, this wouldn't have been a hard command.
Yeah, they would have had an opportunity to actually do this.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Let me make a point before we move on too far. So David wants to go out, and you mentioned that normally a king leads his army out, which is the right thing to do. And David's been a leader here. Mike Morrow, he pointed out after services a good point about when David was fleeing, that he stood there and let all of the people go. And then he went. In other words, you saw his leadership, his concern for his followers as he goes through here. And going out to battle would be a good leadership strategy too. Now, do you remember Ahithophel's advice to Absalom? Was it to go out to battle, for Absalom to lead the people out to battle? No. That's exactly. Because if something happens to Absalom, the whole cause is over. The whole rebellion cause is over. All right? If something happens to David, then the whole cause is over for David's side. And but when Hushai gave counsel to Absalom, what did he say?
Go first.
You go out, you lead them into battle, which appealed to Absalom's pride in some ways. But I want to notice something here. The Absalom and the Israelites felt that Hushai's advice was better, and it says, to the intent that the Lord might bring disaster on Absalom. In other words, when he said, you lead them out, that was God's will that Absalom go out, because God had determined to bring disaster on Absalom. If David goes out, disaster could fall upon David. But all I'm pointing out here is you see the counsel. The counsel of Ahithophel was good for Absalom's side. The counsel of David's 3 generals is good on his side. Stay. You don't need to be out there. We'll go out. And because the cause rests with you on this.
And David's not a young man anymore.
That's right.
He's quite aged.
Yes.
At this point in time.
That's right. But how does David respond to that? Yeah. He's willing to take orders here on that.
All right, let me take verses 6 through 8,
Okay.
and you can have
All right.
Absalom. All right, so the army, verse 6, so the army went out into the field against Israel, and a battle was fought in the forest of Ephraim. You want to point? Do you
Oh.
have a map or anything?
Yeah, I do. All right, so the forest of Ephraim was going to be over in this area, and there's different ideas about what happened. The one that seems most feasible to me is that the battle started over here in Gilead and worked its way over and crossed over into the mountains of Ephraim there, into the woods of Ephraim, and it was being fought there. That seems most plausible in this situation.
Verse 7, and the men of Israel were defeated there by the servants of David, and the loss there was great on that day, 20,000 men. So we're talking about, civil war, basically, is what's taking place. It's not Israel versus a foreign country. This is Israel versus Israel. And 20,000 men fell on this day. It seems reasonable to assume that, there were numbers from probably both sides that fell on this occasion. But probably the greater on Absalom's side. Verse 8, the battle spread over the face of all the country, and the forest devoured more people that day than the sword. So what kind of terrain does this kind of paint a picture of that they're fighting in?
A real thick brush of trees.
Yeah, maybe rocks. I don't know, but it seems really rugged and dangerous territory where the forest would consume more men than the sword itself.
This just shows you another side of God working in
Exactly.
battles. Like when he used the hornets, when he used the angels, and now here he's using the trees to take care of the ones that's against the chosen.
Yep.
I think that's well said. It's not pointed out here, but it does have that feel of God's providence at work here when it describes that the forest took more lives than the sword did.
One of the things that I can't even imagine what hand-to-hand combat would be like with primitive weapons. It would be physically exhausting, even if you weren't hit with a sword, And I don't know what time of year this was. I wonder if it's not the combination of the terrain, the battle, heat. I mean, can you imagine all the different factors that could go in that could take a person's life without them ever being struck by an arrow or a sword? And so people are dying at an alarming rate here. 20,000 is quite a bit. Now, it so happens in verse 9 that Absalom met the servants of David. Absalom rode on a mule. Kings and kings' sons often did. And the mule went under the thick boughs of a great terebinth tree, and his head was caught in the terebinth tree. And he was left hanging between heaven and earth, and the mule which was under him went on. Now, these are the type pictures that I always saw in children's picture books and that you see. And I still think this is reasonable. The text doesn't actually say that it was his hair that was caught in the tree, but it says his head. But I don't know that it was not his hair. Has Absalom's hair ever been mentioned before? Yes.
Chapter 14.
The ends of it off, it weighed
6 pounds, if I remember correct. About 6 pounds, 5 to 6 pounds. Yeah. And so I can see that much of locks being caught in the tree there. By the way, a terebinth tree, this is the terebinth tree in Israel. Can you see how someone riding a mule under that could get their hair or head stuck in that, in the limbs there? And so here he is, left suspended and helpless. He can't get himself free. He can't touch the ground, and he's just hanging there. And it just so happens, one of David's men happens to see it, and he comes and tells Joab and said, I saw Absalom hanging in the terebinth tree. That sounds funny to me. I don't know. And Joab said to the man, you just saw him? In other words, are you kidding me? The enemy was delivered into your hand and you just saw him? Why did you not strike him there to the ground? I would have given you 10 shekels of silver and a belt. But what does this man remember? And the man said, though I would receive 1,000 shekels of silver in my hand, I would not raise my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing the king commanded you, Abishai and Ittai, saying, beware lest anyone touch the young man Absalom. Otherwise I would have dealt falsely for my own life, for there is nothing hidden from the king, and you yourself would have set yourself against me. Yeah, he's like, there's no way. You wouldn't have defended me if I would have done that. And Joab on this occasion would have loved for someone else to take care of this, but if nobody else will, Joab is a man of action, and Joab says, I cannot linger with you. And he took 3 spears in his hand and thrust them through Absalom's heart while he was still alive in the midst of the terebinth tree. The tree didn't kill him. He was still alive. If he wanted to obey David's commands, he could obey David's commands and capture him alive very easily. Which would be unusual, as you pointed out earlier. Normally, you would not be able to have such an easy time of capturing the enemy alive. But the Lord delivered him alive to his hands, and Joab said, no, he's going to die. And not only did he thrust him through with 3 spears, what else does it say? Yeah. That's right. 10 of the young men who bore his armor surrounded Absalom and also struck him. So who killed Absalom? Well, Joab killed Absalom. And now it may have been, he may have used his 10 armor bearers, but he made sure that he was dead. And so, interesting point here just to consider. The Bible says, cursed is every man who hangs on a tree. And Absalom hung on a tree. The Bible also said, cursed is the man who curses his father or his mother. Cursed is the man who sleeps with his father's wives. Absalom was a cursed man. Any way you look at it, Absalom was a cursed man. And so such is the end of the handsome Absalom because of his rebellion towards God's anointed.
You know, I wonder how much Joab felt responsible for bringing Absalom back. Maybe he's just mad that he burned some of his fields.
Maybe.
Just, he's not living.
Right.
I really don't know.
Yes.
He definitely has a close history with Absalom.
Yes. We don't know the reason why he particularly brought Absalom back. We hinted maybe because it would add political stability and for the family to be united. But the family's certainly not united now. And there will never be political stability because Absalom had he stole the hearts of the children of Israel. And as long as Absalom is alive, there will be no political stability. David can't see that because of his sympathy for Absalom. Joab could see that. And Joab said it just can't work that way.
Joab had a great mind in that way. And, and he was right about a lot of things, but
The way he carries it out.
yeah, the way he carries things out.
Yeah.
I mean, he does things his way.
Yeah.
Whether it be the king or whoever it be, he's going to follow. Joab's going to follow his will,
Yes.
and that he's not going to let the king or anybody else get in his way.
No. Anything else before we move on?
Then Joab blew the trumpet, and the troops came back from pursuing Israel, for Joab restrained them. And they took Absalom and threw him into a great pit in the forest and raised over him a great heap of stones. That phrase there, threw him in a pit. Does it seem a little coarse? It doesn't sound like, again, David's orders was to deal gently with, and, I know this isn't, they've already killed him. He's dead, but they just threw him in a pit.
Not the respect that you...
Yeah, it doesn't...
Yes. So who else can you think of that was thrown in a pit and covered with a great heap of stones? You remember Achan? The Achan who took the accursed thing from Jericho? That's what happened to him. Do you remember the kings of the south when Joshua shut them up in a cave and then had them killed and threw them in the cave and threw the stones on top of them? What you see is this type of treatment to those who were rebellious towards God's commands, those who were the pagan kings. And now this is David's son. And I like what you said. Deal gently with him. They're not even dealing gently with his corpse. But yeah, I think that as we were talking about, Absalom, this is the end of Absalom because of his rebellion towards God's anointing.
And it says that all Israel fled, everyone to his own home. Now, so you have this contrast of, Absalom being thrown into a pit and a heap of stones, basically, set as a marker for Absalom's resting place. Then you have verse 18. Now Absalom in his lifetime had taken and set up for himself the pillar that is in the king's valley, for he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. He called the pillar after his own name, and it is called Absalom's monument to this day. So Absalom created a monument for himself, but what is he really going to be remembered for? His rebellion. And the heap of stones is going to be more memory left there than the monument he erected for himself. And it's interesting, if you go back, I think it's 14, chapter 14, it says that, at that point in time where it's given the description of Absalom, it says that he had 3 sons and 1 daughter who he named Tamar. So those 3 sons must not have ever survived.
No.
For him to erect a monument for himself on this occasion. So that's interesting.
By the way, if you go to Israel today in the Kidron Valley, right below the Temple Mount here, the Mount of Olives is going to be on this side, Temple Mount on this side, Kidron Valley. This right here is Absalom's monument. It is not, there's no way this is the monument that Absalom really set up. This would have been dated much later, but it's called Absalom's monument, and it's there. We don't know who originally built this or whatever, so don't get it confused and say, oh, that's still Absalom, still there today. No, this is something else, but the Jews somewhere along the line started calling this Absalom's monument. And do you know what little Israeli children are taught to do when they go by this? They're taught to throw stones at it and say, such is the man who curses his father and mother. And so, in the drill class, we teach our children, Ephesians 6:1, children, obey your parents in the Lord. The Israelis, when they pass by this, you remember Absalom? You remember how he disrespected his parents? You remember what happened to him? And so it's lessons to be learned there. So Absalom set up a monument so he would be remembered. That monument has probably long since been destroyed, but there is a monument that he's remembered by. And it's not a good memory. It's not a good memory. All right, so verse 19. Anything through verse 18 anybody want to add? All right, so verse 19. Then Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, said, let me run now and take news to the king, how the Lord has avenged him of his enemies. All right, Ahimaaz, you remember Ahimaaz, Zadok's son, he's a friend of David. In other words, he's been an ally to David in this, been a messenger. So let me run and tell him the news. This is great news. Is it great news? Will David think it's great news?
Not for
Joab doesn't. Joab knows David's not going to think this is great news. When you send someone who is a close friend of the king or an important individual, what is assumed the news will be? Why don't you send someone to send bad news? That's exactly right. Death of the messenger. You don't like the message, you kill the messengers. Kings sometimes did that. And so the rule was you didn't send, if it was bad news, you sent somebody that could be replaced. If it was good news, you sent someone who, the king would be glad to see and to hear it. So Joab says to him, you shall not take news this day, for you shall take news another day. But today you shall take no news because the king's son is dead. So, yes, we've won the victory. Yes, the rebellion has been put down, but the king is not going to hear this as good news because the king's son is dead. So this is not the message for you to take. Joab said to a Cushite, go and tell the king what you have seen. So the Cushite bowed to him and ran on. Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, again said to Joab, but whatever happens, please let me run also after the Cushite. And Joab said, why will you run, my son, since you have no news ready? In other words, you don't have a message to give to him. I know, but whatever happens, let me run. And so he said, fine, run. So Ahimaaz ran, and he ran by a different way, by the plain, and he outran the Cushite, which means Ahimaaz is going to be the first one there. And he said, let me run after the Cushite, but he runs ahead of the Cushite, and I think intentionally. He is excited. He wants to tell this news. You ever seen youth and their exuberance And let me tell Mama, let me tell Mama. It's that type of excitement he's exhibiting here. And so he takes off running. He outruns. David's sitting between the two gates, and the watchman went up to the roof over the gates of the wall and lifted his eyes, and looked, there was a man running alone. And the watchman cried out to the king and said, the king said, if he's alone, there's news in his mouth. And so this must be a messenger. It's obviously not somebody just fleeing from battle, because there'd be more. And so we're getting news here. And then the watchman saw another man running. And so he said, there's another man running alone. And the king said, well, he also brings news. So the watchman said, I think the running of the first is like the running of Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok. And the king said, he's a good man. So what's the conclusion? He brings good news. All right, this is exactly what Joab did not want, is for David to get his hopes up and then find out that his son's dead. But here comes Ahimaaz in his excitement.
Now he has a plan.
Yeah. Yeah. So Ahimaaz can't wait to tell some of the news. That's right. And so they call out and they say, is all well? Excuse me, let me back up here. So the king, he's a good man. He has good news. Ahimaaz called out and said to the king, all is well. And he bowed down with his face to the earth before the king and said, blessed be the Lord God who has delivered up the men who raised their hands against my lord the king. He got to tell the news. Now, what should have he done at this point? Well, there's no point going into that. We know what his motives were. He wanted to tell the news. And so he found a way to tell the news.
The good side.
The good side. But he stops right there. But the king presses and said, is the young man Absalom safe? And Ahimaaz answered, well, when Joab sent the king's servant to me, your servant, and I saw a great tumult, but I didn't know what was going on. I don't know. Something was going on, but I don't know that. Does he know that? Yes, he knows that. You can't go because the king's son's dead. Oh, please let me go.
Big fat fib.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So he just bows out of that information. And so the king turned aside and said, stand over here. And he looked, and here comes the Cushite running. And he says, there is good news, my lord the king, for the Lord has avenged you this day of those who rose against you. And the king said to the Cushite, is the young man Absalom safe? And the Cushite answered and said, may the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise against you to do you harm be as that young man is. What does that mean? He's dead. And the king was deeply moved. And he went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, he said thus, oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died in your place. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son.
Well, at least he went in private. Nobody's hearing him, right?
It says that with a loud voice, verse 4, with a loud voice he cried, oh, my son Absalom, oh, Absalom, my son, weeping and crying. Who all's hearing this? Everybody. All these men who just risked their life for David, all of these men that were coming back saying, we have saved the Lord's anointed, are coming back and hearing David over the gate as they enter in, crying, if only I had died and you had lived. Oh, my son Absalom, Absalom. How do David's supporters feel? Defeated, crushed in this. Yeah. So, what do you think about David's actions here? Very unwise. Very unwise. For a number of reasons. First of all, did Absalom deserve to die? Yes. I can understand David feeling some responsibility in that. That's understandable. But this was of the Lord. This was of the Lord. And this has happened. And David is the Lord's anointed and needs to stand as the Lord's anointed. These people defended him because he was the Lord's anointed. And he's about to lose all of his support with this type of action. Joab steps in at this point.
You know, before we go any further,
Yes.
I want to say something real quick. You know, I think as you said before, anybody could relate to a son, in the grief. And I don't say that lightly. I can understand that the grief would be enormous. But let's keep in mind how this whole story unfolded with Absalom. After he has Amnon killed, he's gone for 3 years. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a 2-year period and a 3-year period, and I can't remember which is which.
Yeah,
Okay.
something like that. But, David is not, consumed over Absalom's, absence at that point in time. And then when Joab convinces him to finally bring him back, he brings him back, but does he embrace Absalom? No, he won't even see him for years again. So, there's distance there. I definitely think that David is, this is all the responsibility that he's feeling over the situation, that he's contributed to this over the years and really caused this to come to a head at this point in time. And that's just overwhelming him, that he feels this overwhelming responsibility that, this whole thing was avoidable years ago. And I allowed this thing to fester and boil, to the boiling over point.
Yeah.
And now this is what we're left with.
Yeah, and reading this makes me think of when Aaron lost Nadab and Abihu, and Moses said, "You hold your peace. You do not weep in front of the people for them, because what they did was wrong."
Yeah.
And I think David's in that same situation here. He's the leader, and these men went out and risked their lives to save his, and then he's acting this way. What does that? Well, he would rather all of us die than
Yeah.
Absalom.
Well, I mean, his first question, when the runners came, was what? Are my men well? How is the battle?
How many we lose?
Yeah, I mean, we lose, or how's the battle going, or what's the word? Yeah, Absalom. So where David's mind was this whole time.
Yeah.
And so his worst fears have come true.
Yep. So the day of victory turned into a day of mourning for the people. Verse 3 says they stole back as men who are ashamed when they flee in battle rather than victors. Well, Joab is told, "Behold, the king is weeping and mourning over Absalom, and he's grieving." And so verse 4, the king's covered his face. He's crying out aloud. Joab comes into the house of the king and sees David in this state. And he said, "Today you have disgraced all of your servants, who today have saved your life and the lives of your sons and your daughters and the lives of your wives and the lives of your concubines, in that you love your enemy and hate your friends. For you have declared today that you regard neither princes nor servants. For today I perceive that if Absalom had lived and all of us had died today, then it would have pleased you well. Now therefore arise, go out and speak comfort to your servants. For I swear by the Lord, if you do not go out, not one will stay with you this night, and that will be worse for you than all of the evil that has befallen you from your youth until now." One thing about Joab, there are times where he is very, very stern with David. And this is one of those times. And David would accept it on certain occasions. David's relationship with Joab is not great because Joab is not always submissive to David. What do you think of Joab's advice today? It's advice. What do you think of his advice to David? He's right. That's what David's going to have to do. And David probably did need somebody to talk sternly to him. And so the king arose and sat in the gate and told all the people, saying, "There's the king sitting in the gate." In other words, welcoming back his troops as he's supposed to.
And he was in the gate when they left out.
That's
he
right.
was seeing them out. And now he's,
Yes.
Joab has convinced them to come back to that same gate and receive them back in.
Yep. And all of Israel has fled to their tents. In other words, the rebellion's over. They realize Absalom's dead. There's no more cause for us to fight against David. And so they have decisively won the battle because Absalom is dead. And by the way, remember Ahithophel's advice to Absalom was, let's go, and who are we going to strike? Only David. We won't kill everybody else. And they'll come back and be faithful to you. All right, they killed Absalom. No reason to kill everybody else on Absalom's side. What will happen to these people now that Absalom's dead? What will they do? They'll come back to David. They'll come back to David. And so Ahithophel's advice, we see the wisdom in Ahithophel's advice. It just plays out for David rather than for Ahithophel because the Lord was with David.
We get the behind the scenes as far as the whole story that's unfolded. I don't know if David knows the whole story at this point in time as far as what has unfolded and the way Absalom was taken out. So, Joab's advice is certainly spot on and needed. But in another way, the nerve this man has to address David in this way when, David gave a very clear order that, everybody understood. And what did Joab do?
Had opportunity to keep that order.
Opportunity to keep that order, but he chose not to. Mm-hmm. And again, Joab's decisions are probably the right decisions. There was no way that this was, Absalom was going to be able to be retrieved and be dealt with other than eventually being taken out, put to death. I mean, that's what this kind of cause, it always leads to. But still, Joab, he's going to do things his way. And it doesn't matter whose order is given. He's going to do things. And it may be the right way, and it may not be. But we know at the end of David's life, you remember when he's on his deathbed and he's given advice and instruction to Solomon, what's one of those orders he gives his son, Solomon? Yeah. Yes. Do not let his hair turn silver, or however it turns. Don't let him
go to the grave in peace. And with Joab, like you were saying, Absalom. I don't believe Absalom could live and there be stability. But you made a point about that Absalom had burned his fields, and that's not. And you hinted at maybe this is revenge. That would not be out of Joab's character. We'll see later Joab doing some things that you look at it and you say, well, there could be a good reason for doing this, but Joab's not doing it for a good reason. He's doing it for personal vengeance. And that could be the case with Absalom as well.
You also have to take Joab and who he is. I mean, he was one of David's mighty men. He was also a planner in major battles. He always knew the enemy, and he knew how to handle the ones that were against David when it was better to kill them or better to not kill them. And I believe from all the encounters that he had with Absalom, at first part thinking that if he brought him back to his dad, they'd kind of make up, everything would be good. And then after he's seen how Absalom and David actually did come together, and then Absalom actually took it to the point that he went against his dad to the people and then set up his own leadership and actually went against Joab, not only burning his fields, but he was an enemy to Joab. And so then after he run David out of the kingdom, trying to claim the throne, Joab knew that when it was an opportunity to kill him, that would be the only way to stop the problem between him and his dad. And since the other guy didn't do it, he took it upon himself, even though David had commanded him not to happen. He knew it was the best thing for the king for him to be eliminated.
After all, I mean, I think Joab probably understood the play here. And do you think there was any chance David was going to put Absalom to death?
No.
Even though he deserved it?
No.
There was no way. So how would this unfold in the future? It was going to be bad. There was no way for it to unfold in a nice, neat manner.
Yep. In our last couple minutes here, let's just look at a few after effects here. Verse 9 says, all the people who were in dispute throughout all of the tribes of Israel, saying, the king saved us from the hand of our enemies and delivered us from the hand of the Philistines, and now he is fled from the land because of Absalom. But Absalom, whom we anointed over us, has died in battle. Now, therefore, why do you say nothing about bringing back the king? We've got a dilemma here because we chose Absalom as our king, but Absalom is dead. David was really a good king, but we ran him out of the country. What are we going to do? What would you do? What?
Back, David.
That's what people are having to think about. Are we going to ask David back? Or are we going to go a different route? We're going to try to pick somebody else. And so there's confusion in the land. David kind of initiates something here. And he initiates it in such a way that it will bring about a good result. David sent to Zadok and Abiathar saying, speak to the elders of Judah. Remember, Judah was the one that particularly rebelled against him. They chose Hebron as Judah's territory. They chose Absalom. They started this. And speak to the men of Judah, saying, why are you last to bring the king back to the house? Since the words of all of Israel have come to the king, even into his house. You are my brethren. You're you're my bone and my flesh. Why then have you been last to bring the king back? And say to Amasa, remember, that's who Absalom made his commanding officer. Are you not my bone and my flesh? God do so to me and more also if you're not commander of my army before me continually in place of Joab. So what does he offer to those that were like on the fence about this? Yeah, there'll be no retaliation for your rebellion. You're my kinfolk. I'm not going to punish you for this. And Amasa, you're the highest ranking official of the rebellion that's left. I'll incorporate you into my army. As a matter of fact, I'll make you my captain instead of Joab.
Well, let's think about that for a second. That's tried to occur before.
Yeah.
With Abner, and how well did that work? How well you think this is going to work?
Yeah. Joab's not an easy man to take his position. And all right, we're out of time. Thank you very much. We'll see how all of this works out in the next class. Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.